Welcome to Lake Ngami, a shallow lake in northwest Botswana. This lake has been a lifeline for animals and people for years. But in 2019, something terrible happened. The lake started drying up, leaving cattle and hippos trapped in the mud. Hundreds of animals died. It was a disaster that shocked the community and put the future of the lake in question. In this video, you'll learn what caused this tragedy, how Lake Ngami has dried up before, and what the people living here are doing to survive these cycles. In 2019, Botswana faced one of its worst droughts in decades, and Lake Ngami felt the full force of it. As the lake dried up, the last remaining mud pools became the final battleground for survival. The scene was heartbreaking. Herds of exhausted cattle and malnourished hippos, trapped in the thick, crusty mud, were slowly dying of dehydration. There was no escape. In one particularly gut-wrenching moment, a horse, desperate for water, kicked through the mud in a futile attempt to survive. A lone cow, caked in mud and stuck in the bog, awaited its grim fate as scavenging birds circled overhead, picking at the carcasses of those that had already succumbed to the drought. Farmers and fishermen were also fighting against time. They gathered the last few catfish from the lake, knowing that once the water was gone, their livelihood would disappear too. Under the blistering African sun, the lake became a graveyard, with scavengers, both human and animal, trying to hold on to whatever life remained. But while this seemed like an unusual event, it's actually part of a long history of Lake Ngami's natural cycles. Lake Ngami has a long history of drying up and filling back again. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. Local elders remember the lake drying up in the 1980s. Back then, it was just as bad. Cattle died and the local community suffered. In fact, Lake Ngami has gone through many of these cycles. Sometimes, the lake is full and supports a bustling fish industry. Other times, it shrinks to nothing, leaving mud and dust behind. This is part of the lake's natural cycle, influenced by rainfall and droughts. But each time the lake dries up, it brings hardship to the people and animals that depend on it. So, how do these dry spells affect the local community and the animals around the lake? The drying up of Lake Ngami in 2019 didn't just affect the animals. It also had a big impact on the people living nearby. For years, farmers have relied on the lake to water their cattle. When the lake dried up, many of their livestock died, leaving families devastated. Fishermen who once made their living by catching fish, like catfish, suddenly found their businesses collapsing. Without water, there were no fish to catch. Wildlife, including hippos and birds, also suffered. Hippos, which need deep water to survive, were stranded in shrinking puddles, while birds like the marabou stork had to scavenge for carcasses. It's a harsh reality. When the lake thrives, it supports life. But when it dries up, it leaves destruction in its wake. But this isn't just about one bad year. People have seen these cycles before, and they're trying to find ways to cope. The people living around Lake Ngami know that droughts are part of life here, but each time the lake dries up, it feels harder to survive. Some farmers and community leaders believe that building more boreholes could be a solution. Boreholes tap into underground water, so they don't rely on the lake. Boreholes can help during dry spells, providing water for cattle and people, but they're expensive to build, and not everyone can afford them. There's also concern that climate change might be making these droughts worse. As the planet gets warmer, dry seasons could last longer, and the lake might stay empty for more years than before. Communities are caught in a tough situation. They can't predict when the lake will fill up again, but they need to plan for when it happens. Despite all these challenges, the people here haven't given up hope. Even after all the hardship, the people living near Lake Ngami remain hopeful. They've seen the lake dry up before, and they believe that, just like in the past, the rains will return. Back in the 1980s, the lake dried up completely, and it took a while, but eventually, the water came back and life returned. Today, many local elders say they have faith that the same thing will happen again. They trust that the cycles of nature will continue, and that, in time, the lake will refill. In the meantime, people are finding ways to survive, whether it's digging boreholes or relying on their deep knowledge of the land. Lake Ngami is a reminder of nature's power. It gives life, but it can also take it away. The people and animals here understand that balance, and they're working to adapt. Thanks for watching. To learn more about nature's cycles and how communities adapt, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Let's continue this conversation about how we can protect places like Lake Ngami for the future.